Hey everyone. Welcome back to the channel. This is 6th Weeb coming at you with another dose of epic fanfiction. Today, we're diving into part 4 of our ongoing story, Naruko, Queen of Illusions, where reality bends and power knows no bounds. Quick disclaimer. All anime footage used in this video belongs to their rightful creators and copyright holders. This channel is purely for entertainment and discussion, so sit back and enjoy the ride. Now, let's jump into it. Lee. Listen carefully, only those who have yet to experience the springtime of youth choose to walk instead of run. One of many cherished memories of Guy Sensei's teachings danced through his thoughts, sparking a radiant smile across his face. Inspired by those words, he ran with vigor through the quiet, awakening village of Konoha. As he moved across the rooftops, he noticed his own shadow on a nearby building. It was a surreal feeling. Only a few months ago, mastering the tree climbing technique had seemed out of reach. Now, it was second nature. Another smile tugged at his lips, a silent celebration of his progress. Many had doubted he could become a ninja, yet he had proven them wrong. They said he wouldn't be able to control chakra due to a lack of talent, but he had overcome that as well. This time, the smile stayed. It always did when he reached this point each day. As he rounded the corner, the training fields came into view. The crisp scent of pine lingered in the air, and beyond that, the vast sky welcomed the setting sun, its golden light sinking behind the revered Hokage monument. There was a simple reason he loved this moment, though it puzzled him that others didn't feel the same. He felt fortunate. He lived in a village full of beauty, surrounded by people he cared for, and people who cared for him. He might not have been born with natural talent, but what he did have was unwavering determination. He wanted to protect this place, prove his worth, and someday, surpass even his sensei. His thoughts deepened as he neared the training grounds. Days like this felt immune to misfortune, too perfect for anything to go wrong. It was like expecting the sun not to rise, or the birds not to sing. Some things were simply meant to be. By now, he had slowed to a walk, arriving at training ground 9. At this quiet hour, most shinobi were finishing their duties, civilians were settling in for the night, and the usual hustle of the evening hadn't yet begun. He wasn't on duty, nor did he care for nightlife. This moment, was his time. To bathe in the springtime of youth, he whispered, the phrase filled with hope and purpose. Others might not understand, but it meant everything to him. As he stepped into the field, faint sounds of movement caught his attention, soft impacts, quiet effort. Without hesitation, his body moved on instinct. His steps grew silent, his form low to the ground as he crept toward the tree line to investigate. A year of training had taught him how to blend into the background. Drawing closer, he finally saw them. A team of experienced Shinin. It was unusual for anyone besides his own team to train at this hour. What stood out even more was how they were training. He stayed at a respectful distance. Observing another ninja's techniques without permission was considered discourteous. Shinobi thrived on preparation and surprise. If someone saw their techniques, it could compromise their effectiveness. Though this unspoken rule applied mostly to higher-ranked ninja, it was still worth honoring among Shinin. He knew he should move along and train elsewhere, but curiosity held him in place. Such agility, he murmured in admiration. He needed a closer look. Moving carefully, he used the surrounding foliage to get a better view. The shadows resolved into clear figures. Standing tall with arms folded was none other than Kakashi Hatake. The sensei had foregone his standard vest, wearing instead his fitted black training attire. Everyone knew who Kakashi was. Beside him stood 2 students. Even from here, he could recognize the Yamanaka by her blonde hair and the Uchiha by his distinct presence. Both looked worn out, clearly the training had been going on for a while. But what truly captured his attention was the figure across from them. Kneeling, clearly exhausted but refusing to give in, was another blonde, this time a girl. One knee rested on the ground, the other resisting with effort. She pressed her hands to her leg and slowly rose, determination etched into her posture. She didn't make a sound, but the slight stagger in her movement spoke volumes. And that's when everything clicked. His mind, slow to catch up at first, finally pieced the puzzle together. Kakashi's presence. The familiar faces. The 4th member of the team, she could only be one person. Guy Sensei had given him a detailed description of one of Konoha's most spirited Shinin, Naruko Uzumaki. He could recall facts and traits easily: average height, lean build, excels in technique and speed to overcome opponents. But his thoughts were interrupted when, in a flash of motion, a streak of golden yellow and fiery red burst forth. Naruko's kick shattered a boulder where her teammate had just been, sending fragments scattering. Such radiant energy. To grow so much, so quickly. You will be my rival, Naruko-chan, he whispered, unable to hide his admiration. He knew it wasn't exactly proper to watch, but the moment was too powerful to look away. Naruko refused to break eye contact, her gaze unwavering. It was the same as before. Kakashi stood firmly, arms crossed, waiting in silence. Ino and Sasuke were also prepared to react if necessary, though neither looked particularly pleased. 3 months had passed since Team 7 had formed, and they had all trained tirelessly. An eerie silence lingered between them. The sparring session had gone on for hours. Naruko wasn't sure how many, but they had started at dawn, and now the sun had set. Despite the tension, something about the situation made her quietly chuckle. The idea that she could train so intensely for 3 months and still come out on the losing end struck her as oddly amusing. Her laugh was brief, the taste in her mouth briefly reminding her of the effort and strain she had pushed through. Her expression shifted into a familiar, focused frown. She wasn't about to quit. Giving up wasn't an option. She'd push forward until she physically couldn't anymore. But maybe they had a point? Ino sometimes called her eccentric, and honestly, she was fine with that. Sasuke constantly pointed out how stubborn she was, and he wasn't wrong either. But everyone was different, and that's what made a team strong, right? Still, it stung when Kakashi questioned her potential. She wasn't a nobody, and she wasn't going to accept being seen as one, not now, not ever. Kakashi had been hard on them, there was no denying that. He treated them all as if they were unworthy, always responding with the same line, "I'm your sensei, not your friend." At first, things had felt promising. He wasn't overly warm, but he had been approachable and had given them room to adjust to their new lives as shinobi. But after that first week, his demeanor shifted. Training intensified, and his personality turned sharper. The once tardy and relaxed mentor was now precise and relentless. When he said training began at 6, that meant they needed to be ready at 10 to 6, no exceptions. He worked them to the limit. Naruko noticed his methods, subtle but demanding. Ino had nearly broken down several times, not because of cruelty, but the sheer pressure. Sasuke, on the other hand, was constantly compared to his clan legacy. Kakashi would offhandedly refer to him as second best, and occasionally made dry remarks about the Uchiha's past, not out of malice, but perhaps as a challenge. Sasuke once muttered under his breath that he'd take Kakashi's Sharingan one day, and to be honest, Naruko understood the frustration. Kakashi had a way of getting under their skin. He made it clear that, in his view, Naruko wouldn't make it beyond the rank of Chunin, a statement that lit a fire in her heart. She kept quiet. She worked hard. But everyone had limits, and she had reached hers. Now, she was ready to prove him wrong. Her legs trembled slightly, and her voice came out hoarse. Again. Kakashi's eye narrowed with interest. She reminds me more and more of Obito. He could see traces of others in her, her determination, her raw energy, even the small scowl she wore when she fought reminded him of his past teammates. Ino looked at her with genuine concern, clearly unsettled by how hard Naruko was pushing herself. Even Sasuke showed signs of worry, though he tried not to show it too openly. His mouth moved like he wanted to say something, but Naruko's vision was too blurred to make it out. Kakashi's voice was calm. "Give up." Naruko wiped her mouth and steadied herself into her stance. "Let's keep going." Before she could react, Kakashi appeared in front of her in a flash, his foot sweeping towards her head. She had slowed, too much damage, too much fatigue. She should have dodged. The blow sent her flying. Sasuke met her midair with a sharp kick to her back. Naruko gritted her teeth and endured the hit, responding with a swift punch to Sasuke's side. She grabbed his arm and used the momentum to twist around him, holding him in a tight lock. "That's it. Build up momentum," she reminded herself. It was a 3-on-1 exercise, and she had been holding her own for quite a while. Her awareness picked up the sound of Ino's approaching steps, fatigued and heavy. Naruko moved quickly, still holding Sasuke, and used him to block Ino's incoming attack before tossing him aside and launching herself forward. This time, she aimed for Ino directly, hoping for a clean hit. Ino dodged just in time, and Naruko landed softly, ready for the next move. 3 months of intense training had sharpened her instincts. Every detail mattered. Sasuke was behind her, around 10 feet away, charging forward. He was slower now, worn out like the others. Ino was preparing a technique. Naruko recognized the ram seal. That meant it was likely a clan technique. She needed to be careful. Kakashi remained silent, unfazed. He was strong, far stronger than her, and he never showed signs of fatigue. If she was going to get through to him, she needed more than strength. She needed strategy. Scent. That's how she found him. 5 feet to her right, she picked up a distinct scent, faint, but familiar. "You're not that easy to hide from," she muttered, twisting her body to the side. A punch landed where she had stood just moments before, leaving a shallow crater in the ground. The smell reminded her of dogs. It was a unique, sharp scent. Subtle, but once she recognized it, she could track it to some degree. She sprang to her feet again, ready for another round. She wasn't going to back down, not now. Not ever. Not even a minute in, and this was her strongest start yet. Though worn down and clearly struggling to stay focused, Naruko still had one key advantage over her teammates: endurance. Every round of the training felt more intense, yet somehow also more familiar. It began to feel less like facing 3 separate opponents and more like handling one evolving challenge. The true obstacle was no longer her stamina, of which she had plenty, but the strain her body was under. Her vivid azure eyes narrowed as she assessed all 3 opponents before they sprang into action. Naruko remained still, her focused gaze reading their movements before she launched into motion. Navigating through the 3 of them was difficult, but her experience gave her the edge she needed. Sometimes all it took was a subtle shift in footwork or flowing through a kata-like stance to stay ahead, but such tactics could only help so much before she risked getting caught. Whether her reflexes had improved or not, she couldn't tell anymore. She barely reacted to a narrowly avoided strike, a haymaker brushing past, as though her body had learned not to worry after repeated impacts. Right after that came 2 simultaneous kicks, Ino striking high and Kakashi low. This was where Naruko's unpredictability showed its value. With a swift jump and spin, she dodged both attacks. However, she couldn't escape entirely. Sasuke's well-aimed punch connected with her crossed arms as she tried to block, causing her to skid back. To an observer, it might have looked like an elegantly choreographed dance. There were bursts of speed, graceful counters, and swift turns. It was more than just a sparring match, it was a display of control and instinct. Naruko exhaled silently, if only it were just for show. Over the past 3 months, any edge she had over Sasuke had become marginal. Whenever she grew stronger, so did he. Naruko still believed she could surpass him, but this long sparring session had made her confidence waver. Shaking the sting from her arms as she backed away from Sasuke's punch, she muttered under her breath, "That stung." Sasuke didn't respond with his usual smirk. He was clearly worn out, as was Ino. Still, before Naruko could regroup, she noticed Ino reaching for a kunai. She couldn't allow that to escalate. Without hesitation, she charged in. Ino, startled by the sudden rush, swung instinctively. But despite the fatigue, her training showed, she had grown skilled with her kunai. Her strike, although wild, was timed impressively and would have made contact. However, Naruko's expression shifted to focused determination. Channeling chakra into the soles of her feet, she halted abruptly just outside the kunai's range. The sudden stop was enough to throw off Ino's momentum. The move had been risky but paid off. In that split-second opening, Naruko swiftly disarmed Ino and held the weapon under her chin, without touching, speaking firmly, "Surrender." It wasn't a question, and her tone didn't invite argument. Still, there was no malice in her voice. Naruko prided herself on never needing to be harsh, especially toward a fellow kunoichi. Ino understood and dropped her guard with a nod. "Well, that's one less to worry about." "Thanks," Naruko offered her a brief smile, adding a playful wink. Ino responded with a small smile of her own before stepping back. Naruko turned to her remaining opponents. And then there were 2. Kakashi remained calm as always, his demeanor unreadable. Naruko wasn't surprised. As she and Kakashi prepared to continue, Sasuke raised a hand to signal he was done. "I'm exhausted, and I'm not risking more strain just for one of your lessons." His bluntness wasn't new. Over time, his tone toward Kakashi had grown more candid, sometimes bordering on irreverent. It had once earned him extra laps or additional missions, but right now, he seemed indifferent to the consequences. Kakashi gave him a long look, unreadable as ever, before finally speaking. "You did well, Sasuke. You too, Ino. Today proved that 2 of my students are willing to do what must be done, to rise to the challenge, and most importantly, to follow direction when it matters," he added, letting his gaze rest on Naruko, without hesitation. Sasuke nodded slightly, unsure how to respond. He had trained with absolute intensity for months, pushing past limits daily. Kakashi had set the expectations clearly from the start, what he would teach, how he would teach it, and the goal behind it all. This day was meant to test that progress. Sasuke had already come to terms with the fact that Kakashi was simply stronger and that he had reached his current limit. Yet, instead of criticism, Kakashi offered praise, even as Naruko continued to fight on, unwilling to quit as he and Ino had done. Throughout the match, Sasuke had silently hoped she would surrender, just get it over with. He respected her persistence, even if it annoyed him. Kakashi turned back to the group. "You're dismissed. Rest up and prepare. Tomorrow, each of you will be assigned to a separate team for your first C-ranked mission. Sasuke, your team departs from the main gate at 10:30 a.m. sharp. Ino, you'll leave from the west gate at 11 a.m. for the first time in a while." He offered a visible smile, an expression rare for the usually reserved Jounin. "I managed to adjust the departure times knowing you'd be tired. Good work, both of you." Sasuke vanished in a blur, clearly surprised, or perhaps simply in disbelief. Even Kakashi couldn't tell. Ino lingered for a few seconds longer before Kakashi gestured for her to go. She left with a small wave toward Naruko, an unspoken message of encouragement, though awkwardly delivered. Did they really think I was that harsh? Kakashi wondered to himself. I suppose that means the training is working. One essential lesson he had successfully instilled in his students over the past 3 months was the value of respect. It had taken effort, particularly with Sasuke, who reminded him of his own younger self, confident to a fault, convinced that his ideas and strategies were the only ones worth considering. Some might call it determination, others might call it overconfidence, but either way, it was something that needed to be guided in the right direction. Through their time together, Sasuke had experienced a few humbling moments that encouraged growth and teamwork. Helping Sasuke understand the importance of collaboration didn't mean changing his goals, especially his personal mission involving his brother. That was a path Sasuke had to navigate for himself. Still, if he had been in Sasuke's place, he might have felt the same way. That much, he understood. Ino, by contrast, was easier to work with. Her challenge was her tendency to be overly assertive. He responded with strategic pushback, sometimes firm, but always intended to foster growth. From the outside, it may have looked like he was being overly critical, and perhaps he was at times. But it had results. Ino learned to listen, to contribute effectively, and to make thoughtful decisions not based solely on her own opinions. His guidance, while tough, helped her mature into a sharper, more capable shinobi, someone who would one day make a strong leader for the Yamanaka clan. She had adapted well. Through constructive feedback and focused training, she developed into a more balanced and insightful person. Normally, these lessons would come through years of experience and reflection, but time was limited. His role required that his students be prepared sooner rather than later. That meant starting off with a level of discipline and structure similar to that of specialized training programs. Ino grew through this process. Sasuke, too, had his turning point during one of their final team assessments, something the instructor had anticipated from the start. Then there was Naruko. Her progress over the past 3 months had been remarkable. Just like her teammates, she had absorbed everything taught and had shown strong development across the board. Yet, her challenges were also the ones he had most expected. From the beginning, he'd known she would bring a unique energy to the group, one that would require a different kind of support and understanding. Flashback. Alright. My name is Ino Yamanaka. I like flowers and other beautiful things, as well as spending time with my family. I dislike people who act thoughtlessly and those who take everything too seriously. I have 2 goals in life, one is to find someone truly special, and the other is to surpass my father and become the strongest leader in the Yamanaka clan. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I enjoy training. I dislike, he glanced toward Naruko briefly. My ambition is to become strong enough to bring justice to my family. He left it at that. This time, Kakashi allowed a flicker of surprise to show. To think he's come this far. People always said he was completely focused on revenge. Clearly, Sasuke still carried the weight of his past, but it no longer controlled him as it once had. I didn't expect this kind of growth so soon. There's still work to do, but much less than I originally thought. Hopefully, Naruko will be Rhea. Stop spacing out already, will ya, Cyclops? We're ready to get started on something important. Kakashi's thoughts were cut short as his attention refocused. Naruko sat back casually with her legs and arms crossed, clearly relaxed but not exactly pleased. Oh? In a hurry now? That's a little ironic coming from the person who was napping just a while ago. That's not how I see it, she murmured, casually scratching the back of her head before slipping her hands into her pockets. Resting is never wasted time. When I sleep, I recover, and that helps me train harder. Just sitting here and overthinking things feels like a waste. And for the record, I'm nothing like those two. She ended her point with a confident smirk. Kakashi met her all too familiar blue eyes. That's a bold statement, Naruko. Please, tell us more. It was clear to him that she genuinely believed every word she had said. Maybe later. Flashback ends. She was clever, smarter than many gave her credit for. Naruko had figured out the meaning behind the test and the reasons for Kakashi's strict approach. She stared straight at him, her emotions clearly stirred. She had poured all her effort into this, every ounce of energy, every idea, yet the outcome seemed unfair. She didn't feel resentment toward her teammates, and it wasn't about the reward. What unsettled her was the inconsistency. You said we had to beat you to earn our reward, she said, her voice louder than usual, her typical relaxed nature momentarily gone. Kakashi, ever calm, replied with a tone that paid tribute to the values of a long-standing legacy. Yes, I told you what the test was. I outlined what you'd be learning, and that when the time came, you'd be evaluated. The others demonstrated they understood the deeper meaning behind it, and that's why they passed. He paused. Ino was the first to realize this. She chose to step back, which showed maturity, and so she joined my team. He continued, giving Naruko a complete explanation. Sasuke's approach was different. He may not have understood the full purpose at first, but he acknowledged his limitations and accepted help. That growth mattered. The words struck Naruko hard. Her wide eyes lowered, and she gently dropped to the ground. Being challenged for a full day by two of her closest friends and a highly experienced mentor was exhausting, both mentally and physically. It was a tradition, passed down from their teachers before them. Now, it was her turn. Kakashi walked over to where she sat and briefly lifted his forehead protector, using his Sharingan for a moment to check the surroundings and ensure no interruptions. Then, kneeling down to Naruko's level, he matched her earlier posture with calm attentiveness. Naruko looked worn out, legs outstretched, arms loosely at her sides, and her head lowered. She wasn't broken, just spent. Naruko. No reply. He raised his voice gently, Naruko. Still nothing. Naruko. At last, her intense azure eyes locked with his. Despite her calm exterior, something about his commanding tone sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was the weight of what he carried. His gaze, when fully present, had a way of cutting through distractions. It reminded her of the stories about her father, Minato-sensei, whose presence alone could move others to action. Naruko, do you understand now? The meaning behind this test, your test? His words carried a lesson passed down through generations. Each member was being evaluated not just on their skills, but on how well they could see beyond the surface. It was a lesson in teamwork, patience, strategy, and growth. A team like hers had to experience a challenge that pushed them just enough to prepare them for the real world, a place that often required clever thinking and unity. Ino had realized her limits. Sasuke had accepted his flaws. Now, it was Naruko's turn. She would reflect, acknowledge the purpose, and move forward. That was the plan, at least, until she smiled playfully and whispered. Behind you, ooh. The playful warning sounded almost unnatural, like something out of a storybook. In that instant, Kakashi felt the light pressure of a kunai at his neck. I figured out the test too, Kakashi-sensei, Naruko said, her voice filled with tired but proud determination. But here's the thing, I don't give up. Kakashi remained still, not alarmed, but genuinely impressed. Had he truly been outmaneuvered by a Genin? After nearly 9 hours of intense sparring, had she finally found her opening? He chuckled quietly, then leaned around to meet her gaze with his uncovered eye. I should have expected that from you, Naruko. You never give up, not until you find a way. Just like your father, he thought privately. She received one of Kakashi's rare, sincere smiles, the kind that made her feel acknowledged in a way words couldn't express. I guess this is the start of something real. A true team bond. Well done, you beat my clone. With that, the version of Kakashi in front of her disappeared with a puff, revealing that she had spent 9 hours battling a clone. Still, he had seen her look at him with genuine pride, even after everything. Naruko stood, tired but satisfied. She had given her all, and despite the unorthodox path, she succeeded. Looking down, she spotted a scroll with gold detailing, an unmistakable indicator of a C-rank mission and above. What drew her attention most, though, was the large, ornate letter B printed in the center. I seriously love you, Kaka-sensei, she whispered with a grin. What could she say? The way to her heart was through exciting, career-changing opportunities. In front of the Hokage stood some of the most capable jonin among the ranks, each one a master of their craft. To the untrained eye, they appeared to be ordinary citizens, blending effortlessly into crowds and moving through society with ease. Yet, like a well-crafted switch, when the time came, these shinobi revealed their true prowess, capable of taking on the strength of many. They were faster, stronger, and sharper in reflexes, each one a result of years of rigorous training. Even those considered less prominent among them were quick-witted and highly decisive under pressure. "So, why are you half an hour late, Kakashi?" the Hokage asked, his tone even and calm as the masked jonin entered near the end of the meeting. Kakashi, seemingly unfazed by the attention, made his way through the gathered shinobi, offering faint apologies as he passed, though his demeanor didn't reflect much regret. He quietly took a seat between Guy and Asuma on one of the futons, mirroring the others. He could feel the stares, particularly from Kurenai, who had made it known she wasn't fond of his frequent tardiness. Then again, Kurenai had strong opinions on many things, none of which particularly troubled him. Breaking the brief silence, Kakashi offered with a relaxed tone, "I'm not sure why this is still surprising. It's not exactly unusual for me." The Hokage exhaled slowly as he set down his pipe. "Yes, I know," he responded knowingly. It was a common occurrence, and as always, Kakashi would have to catch up on the updates he missed. With a soft sigh, the Hokage continued, "As I was saying, we'll need to assign more Chunin and Jonin to the eastern borders. Based on current reports, the conflict in Kiri continues. We anticipate that shinobi from that region, whether deserters or stragglers, may seek refuge in the land of fire or lightning. We must remain cautious. Unfamiliar ninja pose a potential threat to the balance and safety of the village." The meeting progressed with various updates, intelligence from within the village, minor insights gathered by spies, and updates on their alliance with Suna. It was the standard monthly briefing, ensuring all jonin were equally informed. If any major developments had slipped through the usual channels, they would be addressed here. One recurring topic was the progress of the Jinan. This was especially important, both for planning and for understanding the next generation of shinobi. Kakashi hadn't attended the last few meetings, partly to keep the development of his team under wraps. In retrospect, it hadn't been the most strategic choice, but the Hokage had been content with receiving personal updates directly from him. Every jonin had a responsibility to support the growth of future protectors of the village. These meetings often felt like family gatherings, where the most promising recruits were talked about with pride and interest. Kakashi figured it was time to highlight the progress of his own team. "So, Kakashi, most of us haven't heard about your team," Sarutobi said, cutting gently into Kakashi's thoughts. Of course, most really meant everyone. Team 7 had been a topic of curiosity for quite some time, sometimes for positive reasons, other times for concern. His team included 2 well-known clan heirs, technically 3, though one remained a secret for now. One of them was the last loyal Uchiha, already a prodigy in her own right. And then there was Naruko, the spirited girl carrying a powerful secret within her. He thought to himself with a quiet sense of confidence, "You're about to see just how much my students have grown. They've earned this." Following the shinobi code, Kakashi wouldn't reveal anything confidential, but he was more than ready to show just how far Team 7 had come. The next day. After a restful night, Naruko woke up feeling refreshed, expecting the usual smooth start to her morning. But when she glanced into the mirror, she blinked in surprise. Although most of the swelling had faded, her body was still covered with tiny cuts and scrapes, more than she remembered earning. It wasn't anything that would keep her up at night, but it was mildly irritating to find herself patched with so many little reminders of training. Some of her neighbors had likely overheard her muttered complaints that morning, as she clumsily bumped around and voiced her frustration with exaggerated flair. On the brighter side, her face had healed quite well. Only a small bruise on the left side of her forehead remained, courtesy of Ino's perfectly timed mid-air kick. Naruko winced at the memory. Ino was cheerful and sweet most of the time, but when it came to sparring, she packed a serious punch. Naruko usually didn't worry too much about appearances, but today she wanted to at least look presentable. With her training progressing and the village starting to take more notice, it felt right to put her best foot forward. Her thoughts wandered, making her barely notice the space others instinctively gave her as she walked through the bustling morning streets of Konoha. It was Saturday, the traditional day for families to do their shopping, especially the diligent homemakers who set out early. Naruko was used to it by now, but even after 12 years, the subtle avoidance and occasional disapproving glances still stung. She kept her gaze low, hands tucked casually into her pockets, returning no more than a silent acknowledgement before eventually making her way toward the rooftops. A morning walk would have been pleasant, but she didn't mind arriving a few minutes early. As she approached the main gate, she was surprised to see her assigned team already assembled. The mission scroll she received had all the markings of her teacher's trademark vagueness, typical of Kakashi. It gave the basics, the time to arrive, her teammates' names, and the objective: travel to the capital and await further orders. It wouldn't be a mission from Kakashi if I wasn't being thrown into something entirely unfamiliar, she thought. Naruko was nothing if not realistic. She understood that her presence might be more of a challenge for the team than an asset. She clicked her tongue softly in frustration, imagining possible team compositions. A fellow fresh Chunin would be ideal, anything more experienced, and she feared she'd be outmatched. She may have been the most capable among her peers, but as a newly promoted Junon who had never even ventured beyond the village walls, the challenge ahead felt daunting. Still, what better way to grow? Naruko recalled how she had managed to land a decisive hit on Kakashi's clone, more through perseverance and sheer determination than anything else. It had taken nearly 9 hours of exhausting effort, but she had succeeded. That memory bolstered her spirits. As she neared the group, she felt a rare flutter of nervousness. The first person she saw was a familiar figure, brown-haired with a mid-length fringe over one eye, wearing his headband bandana style and dressed in the typical attire of a seasoned Konoha Chunin. Naruko recognized him as Izumo Kamizuki, often stationed at the village gate. Right beside him, as expected, was his usual partner, Kotetsu Hagane. His spiky black hair, a neatly trimmed goatee, and a bandaged nose made him instantly recognizable. Like Izumo, Kotetsu wore the standard Konoha shinobi uniform, a sign of their veteran status. The final member, clearly the team leader, was someone unfamiliar to her. He appeared to be in his mid to late 40s, with untamed curly brown hair and intense green eyes. A serious expression rested permanently on his face, though Naruko sensed no hostility, just the focused demeanor of a seasoned ninja taking his mission seriously. Grateful for her ability to mask her emotions, Naruko stepped forward confidently, addressing the senior Jonin directly. Shinon Naruko Uzumaki, reporting for B-rank mission to the capital. The older man regarded her calmly, impressed by her steady approach. Fresh Shinon Naruko Uzumaki, he repeated with a small smile. Well, this just got interesting. Before Naruko could respond, he continued, name's Keshi. Now, before those two head over, let me give you a quick overview. I know you're new to missions like this, he said, gesturing over his shoulder to Izumo and Kotetsu, who were approaching. Your sensei let me know you're capable, so I'll treat you accordingly. He gave her a firm pat on the back. Follow orders, and we'll have no trouble. Before Naruko could reply, the two Chunin joined the conversation, smiling cheerfully. Don't mind him, Kotetsu said with a laugh. You're Naruko, right? Her stiff posture began to ease with their friendly demeanor. Yeah, that's me. Now that I think about it, this is the first time I've seen you two away from the gate. Kotetsu groaned dramatically. Please, don't remind me. Here's a tip, if you ever get assigned gate duty, try to avoid it. Starts as a one-time thing, and next thing you know, you're doing it every week. Missions like these are way more exciting. I'd even take a shot at an A rank once in a while. Izumo grinned, clearly amused. He complains, but here's a little inside trick, gate duty is the only C rank that doesn't require travel. That makes it a quick and easy way to earn some Ryo. He rubbed his fingers together playfully, causing the others to chuckle and shake their heads. Despite their lightheartedness, Naruko's eyes sparkled with interest. She replied seriously, I'll keep that in mind. She was already planning how to make it work. With shadow clones, she wouldn't even need to be there herself. Just a few volunteers sent early each day, and she'd have a steady income. Before her imagination could get too carried away, Keshi stepped in again, voice stern. Izumo's not wrong, but there's a flip side. The more you take on, the more you attract attention, and not always the good kind. It's something to be mindful of. All three shinobi looked at him in surprise. Keshi was clearly a professional through and through. His serious advice seemed oddly out of character, considering his usually blunt demeanor. Naruko tilted her head slightly, curiosity piqued. I can think of a few that advice would apply to. What brought that up, old man? She gave him a teasing smile to match the tone he'd used with her. Keshi raised an eyebrow with mock irritation. I'm surprised Kakashi hasn't told you already. Naruko simply shrugged, it's not my fault he can't put together a proper sentence without getting distracted by his novels. With a short laugh, Keshi shook his head. That may be true, but Kakashi Hatake is still regarded as one of Konoha's top jonin, especially after his recent break. It had surprised many in the village when he was temporarily removed from the active shinobi roster. It's not often that someone transitions so abruptly from the Anbu to early retirement. Naturally, speculation spread quickly. While most didn't know the full story, Kakashi's 3-year break had seemed to recharge his energy, and now he was a strong candidate for becoming the 5th Hokage. Given all this, it was interesting to hear what his student thought of him. Naruko clicked her tongue and gave him a flat look. Top jonin or not, reading adult books in front of kids is definitely against the rules, she said, pausing thoughtfully. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's illegal. That's a serious offense, probably involving a formal investigation. Seeing someone so young being so well versed in the rules and not afraid to speak up was quite something. Grateful for the excuse to shift the conversation, especially for the sake of his fellow jonin, Keshi seized the moment when he spotted the carrier pigeon they'd been expecting circling above. Holding out his arm, the bird quickly landed. Enough talk. About time this thing showed up. Now how do I get this seal to work? He muttered, clearly frustrated. Despite his experience, Keshi was among the many who struggled with carrier pigeon seals. It always took a few tries for him. Carrier pigeons were a standard part of shinobi communication in Konoha. Though it seemed old-fashioned compared to modern tools, they remained reliable for one-time message delivery. The bird itself wasn't surprising, but the item attached to its leg caught Naruko's attention, specifically, the seal. Naruko shook her head gently. There's a simpler way to open that, she said, stepping forward. Without hesitation, she carefully removed the seal from the pigeon's leg, and with a small puff of smoke, the scroll released a beautifully designed and rather grand-looking carriage. Lifting an eyebrow, she glanced at Izumo and Kotetsu, who just shrugged in response. Why do we need a carriage? That would be because of me, Naruko-san. Just her luck. That day's journey had been unusual, to say the least. With Kotetsu and Izumo positioned on either side of the carriage, Naruko had taken up the rear, a role she was more than familiar with. She'd been trained extensively in team tactics, thanks to Kakashi's thorough instruction. Every physical lesson was matched with mental exercises, strategic planning, alternate combat styles, and general field knowledge. One thing Naruko and her teammates hadn't anticipated was how comprehensive the training was. It included all sorts of essential skills, even ones as specific as tying different kinds of knots. She knew the slip knot, the half knot, and her personal favorite, the lasso knot, each suited to different tasks in the field. Truthfully, she couldn't complain. Her first real mission as a shinobi had gone smoothly. In some ways, she was grateful for the peace. With all that had happened, one would expect Naruko to feel content as the team settled down for the night. She'd already eaten and was keeping warm, even though she was furthest from their modest campfire. But ever since the unexpected arrival of their escort, she'd stayed quiet. Lying on her side, she lifted her head from the Fuinjutsu scrolls she had spread out in front of her. Her eyes met those of an unexpected figure, Koharu Utatane, one of the 3 village elders. The situation had been recurring more frequently lately. Each time Naruko glanced up to sneak a look at her, she would find the other person doing the same. Their shared history gave each moment of eye contact an extra weight, neither friendly nor outright hostile, just a lingering tension that passed in quiet stares before they both returned to their tasks. The rest of the group had picked up on the subtle friction from the start, and Naruko was already bracing herself for another awkward day ahead. Their journey so far had been mostly quiet. Keshi had taken on the role of driving the carriage, while Koharu, an esteemed and retired kunoichi, remained seated inside. Koharu had made it very clear that the mission needed to be carried out with the utmost precision and professionalism. Given her rank and experience, the team had little choice but to follow her instructions to the letter. Her expectations weren't unreasonable, but they were certainly designed to prioritize her comfort and safety. Still, it was hard not to feel like everything had been tailored to her convenience. For example, there was a strict rule to keep conversation to a minimum unless necessary. The pace of travel was another matter altogether. They weren't even allowed to go at the carriage's full speed. Instead, they had to maintain a slower, more cautious pace in the name of stealth and security. But it was hard to see what was stealthy about 2 large horses pulling a noisy carriage. The most frustrating part for Naruko, however, was the scouting requirement. Every 30 minutes, she had to move ahead of the group, assess the surroundings, and report back, first to Keshi, who would then pass the information to Koharu. It was a constant cycle of responsibility that left her with little room for error. And the pressure was beginning to show. Naruko believed in her skills. She had always been confident, sometimes even perceived as overly self-assured. She was determined, headstrong, and had a history of challenging expectations. Still, there was one thing that really got to her: the fear of failure. She wanted to succeed in every mission, especially this one, her first real assignment of this nature. These conditions, however, weren't ideal. Working with unfamiliar teammates was a situation typically reserved for Chunin-level missions, but Kakashi had placed her here regardless. Combined with Koharu's demanding preferences, it felt like a setup for inevitable blame should anything go wrong. Knowing this, Naruko chose to stay focused and lead by example. The rest of the team seemed to follow her lead. Keshi kept watch, and Izumo and Kotetsu had been gone for some time. One was securing the perimeter, the other gathering firewood. Naruko didn't mind the cold much, but she couldn't help but notice Koharu trying to keep warm as the night chill set in. A small part of her found it amusing, though she quickly pushed the thought aside. Shaking her head for what felt like the 100th time that day, Naruko reminded herself she had more important things to focus on. Might as well make the most of this time, she thought. She rose to her feet with a quiet stretch, stepping away from the group. Dressed only in her regular training pants and arm guards, she didn't bother putting on a shirt. Her body was used to the temperature. As expected, the question came, "Where are you going?" She turned slowly and yawned. "Well, I was thinking of turning in for the night," she said, waving casually. "But then I figured, why waste such a lovely evening? A young kunoichi like me is a well-oiled machine. Skipping a good training session would be a disservice to the village." Her tone was light, just a touch playful, clearly teasing but never rude. As she disappeared into the trees, she felt eyes on her back, watchful, perhaps even disapproving, but she didn't dwell on it. There were more important things on her mind. After an intense training session using her shadow clones, Naruko returned to camp feeling satisfied. It had been a rigorous mental workout, like facing 100 opponents all at once. These sessions helped her sharpen her reflexes and decision-making skills. Though they didn't improve her physical strength much, the tactical advantage was undeniable. The one drawback? A lingering, pounding headache that multiplied with every clone she used. Even though she knew the consequences, Naruko had pushed herself again. Her mind felt like mush, a not-so-great trade-off for a burst of rapid experience. But that was Naruko. Determined to get stronger, always pushing forward, even when it meant a tough few days ahead. Just a thought, Keshi, what do you think is the biggest benefit of having all that experience? Do you believe it really makes a difference in tough situations like people say? Kotetsu asked curiously as he returned to the camp. The three ninja were gathered around the campfire, soaking in its warmth. Naruko smiled, arriving at just the right moment. "I'm not sure I could list all the benefits, but I definitely know some of the challenges. Like always being prepared, staying alert, and knowing when to take a break. Experience teaches you to stay ahead of the game." Even though she was clearly tired, her sense of humor stayed intact. The group chuckled, the relaxed energy helping lighten the mood. Naruko joined them, earning a playful nudge from Keshi, who then turned the spotlight on her with a question. "Say, Naruko, I try not to listen to rumors, but I realize I don't know much about you. What made being a ninja so appealing to you?" His tone was easygoing, though there was genuine interest beneath the surface. He knew Naruko hadn't exactly chosen her path, more like grown into it, but he wanted to hear her thoughts. Naruko leaned back, letting the fire's warmth reach her as she thought. "To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. You all know I didn't grow up with any real mentors or family. I was on my own from a young age. The Hokage made sure someone checked in once in a while, but no one really guided me. It just felt like being a ninja was expected of me. But I made the decision myself when the time came. I've actually lived a pretty free life, and choosing to serve the village felt like the right next step." She skipped over the more difficult parts of her past, though they shaped who she was. Still, what she said was true. It had always been her reality. It can only get better from here, she thought. There was a moment of thoughtful silence before Izumo broke it. "You've really been through a lot, haven't you?" It was a simple statement, but everyone there understood the weight behind it. They knew why, even if Naruko didn't, and that knowledge left a quiet sense of respect among them. Izumo shifted and tossed another log into the fire. "By the way, what were you up to while you were gone? I thought about checking in, but Keshi said you were okay." Naruko grinned at the question. "Just getting in a little training before calling it a night," she said in a quieter voice, "mostly to get a break from Mr. Sunshine over there." Her light joke earned a few more smiles, but Keshi looked slightly concerned. "Training in the middle of a mission? Be careful not to overdo it. You don't want to wear yourself out. Naruko just gave a determined smile. I have to give it everything I've got to grow stronger. And besides, I'll rest when the job's done. Keshi had remained mostly quiet since Naruko had joined the group. He observed her closely. She was an intriguing young ninja. At first, he'd been unsure when he heard about the last-minute addition to the team. It wasn't common for a Genin to leave their original squad and join missions like this, though not unheard of. Still, he had been assured by Kakashi and the Hokage themselves that Naruko was more than capable. That kind of support wasn't given lightly, and despite his doubts, he respected their judgment. The mission ahead was complex, but Kakashi and the third Hokage knew what they were doing. Their confidence in Naruko spoke volumes. Even though the day had been uneventful, Naruko had handled herself with the determination of a seasoned shinobi. When ordered to break off from the team temporarily under Koharu's command, she had followed through without hesitation or complaint. She never questioned orders from Izumo, Kotetsu, or Keshi. Though many civilians overlooked her, Naruko was often a topic of discussion among the ninja, though not always in a positive light. Still, she was far different from the rumors, confident, direct, and undeniably youthful. She acted her age, spirited and bold, but was easy to like. Keshi found himself warming up to the spirited Genin, though he still kept a wary eye on the power she carried within. Still, it didn't stop him from offering some heartfelt advice. I'm sure you'll reach whatever goal you have, Naruko, but try not to rush. Enjoy your youth while it lasts. Naruko gave a dramatic eye roll but smiled. Aw, getting all soft on me already? Thanks for the advice, but I've got plans to work on. First I need a decent apartment and a few extra outfits before I can think about impressing anyone. Then there are some things I'd like to accomplish, and for that, I'll need strength and a little money. So, no time to waste. The three older ninjas shared a glance. Naruko had a clear vision for her future, and though she kept the details vague, her resolve was unmistakable. Kotetsu gave her a light tap on the shoulder and smiled. You're not a bad kid, Naruko. A bit stylish with that spiky hair, but hey, everyone's got their own flair, right? Naruko smirked and fired back without missing a beat. Stylish? Please, this hair is all natural. But what's under that bandage, huh? You hiding something cool under there? Laughter broke out again, the warmth of the moment pushing the cold night back. No way that's natural, one of them said, still chuckling. Outnumbered but not outwitted, Naruko placed a hand over her heart with mock sincerity. Seriously, it's all natural. Keshi shook his head, still smiling. It had been a long time since a mission had made him laugh like this. You'd argue that night is day, wouldn't you? It was the kind of spirited reply they had come to expect from the bold Genin. And I'd win, Naruko replied, grinning. Naruko's eye twitched slightly as she and her squad made their way through one of the many vibrant forests that cover the region. Alright, fine, but I still don't see the big deal. It's just the capital. I doubt anything will go wrong. Keshi glanced back at the younger ninja with a firm expression. Let's hope you're right. Just follow my orders closely. Everyone remembers their first visit, let's make sure yours is a good one. Naruko nodded in response, her casual demeanor shifting into something much more focused. Though young, she carried herself like a seasoned professional. The squad captain wasn't surprised. No matter the circumstances, once Naruko received an order, she followed it precisely, almost like clockwork. Over the past 3 days of travel, she had formed a smooth working rhythm with her older comrades, who had come to appreciate her company and dedication. The journey itself had been calm, just as expected. They were approaching its end now, and beyond the forest's edge lay the first sight of the capital. At this point, any chances of trouble were extremely slim. Even so, should any issues arise, it would be a challenge for anyone to take on the well-trained platoon of soldiers escorting them. As usual, Naruko walked at the rear, while Izumo and Kotetsu flanked the carriage driven by Keshi. Inside the carriage sat their high-spirited passenger, who had just sent a sharp look in Naruko's direction, possibly for speaking out of turn. The capital's guards had joined them early that morning to ensure a secure arrival by late afternoon. The added company made the trip more relaxed, at least for Naruko. For most of the journey, she had moved in near silence behind the carriage due to protocol. That quiet had given her time to think and mentally prepare, even if she hadn't been fully briefed on their destination. She didn't expect much in terms of conflict. The capital was simply a large village, mostly filled with kind and hard-working residents, alongside nobles and government officials. At the very top sat the country's royal family, led by the daimyo. That detail had caught Naruko off guard. Their mission had two parts: to escort and protect their cheerful passenger and to ensure security during their stay. Simple enough. What surprised her, though, was that they would be staying in the daimyo's palace itself. That would have been helpful to know in advance, Naruko thought, mildly exasperated. Koharu had been summoned for political discussions with the country's leadership. The specifics were far beyond Naruko's rank, but she had been assigned to assist, mainly serving as extra security during meetings and staying alert in case any backup was needed. In other words, she'd be spending the next week on high alert guard duty, while the others likely received more dynamic tasks. Keshi would probably accompany the meetings. Izumo and Kotetsu would likely escort dignitaries, manage logistics, and help organize strategic defenses, important work, with a bit more variety. Naruko's determined expression wavered for a brief moment. So I'm just going to be babysitting some overly formal guest related to the daimyo's family. Wonderful, she thought. I wonder what would happen if I asked to trade jobs? She sighed and shook the thought away. While the work might feel repetitive, she didn't want to let frustration get the better of her, especially not on her first official visit. Besides, reputations were built through discipline and patience. Opportunities would come in time. She still couldn't help wondering why she had been picked for this assignment. Had Kakashi chosen it for her intentionally? Or was she simply overthinking things again? Either way, her goal was simple: complete the mission, keep a low profile, and head home with experience and solid pay. As she stayed deep in thought and the group continued their steady pace, the trees finally gave way to a wide clearing. The sight before them brought the group to a quiet stop. The capital stretched out ahead, grand, colorful, and full of life. Naruko gave a soft, impressed whistle. Maybe this won't be so bad after all. Even she couldn't complain about the view. In the distance, she could already spot a few ice cream shops, what looked like a museum rivaling the Hokage Tower in size, and, well, something she wasn't entirely sure about, but probably best not to ask. She noticed Kotetsu and Izumo eyeing the same building. Clearly, it had caught their attention as well, though Naruko simply raised an eyebrow and continued walking, letting the city's charm speak for itself. Please, sir, our guests arrived at the gates over 10 minutes ago. They will be at the doorstep any moment now, and it would be quite impolite to keep them waiting. The words, though direct, were delivered with a calm and courteous tone, making them feel more like a gentle reminder than a reprimand. The man being addressed set aside the object that had captured his attention, a Rubik's Cube, and exhaled deeply. Do I really have to do this? Hiruzen's been here enough times to know his way around. We don't need to go through the same routine every visit. As he stood, it became clear he was no longer in his prime. His dignified features bore the marks of age, with his once jet black hair now streaked with gray and neatly combed back into a tight bun. He wore a dark blue layered sweater over light gray pants, giving him the look of someone both refined and comfortably retired. The ever-dutiful voice of his butler responded, "Sir, I've been reminding you all week, Lord Hiruzen will not be attending. Koharu Utatane, one of the village elders from Konoha, is expected to arrive." He pulled a gold pocket watch from his coat, tucking his white glove beneath his arm, right about now. Clearly, this routine had been practiced countless times over the years. What? The man froze before a surge of nervous energy took over. Rushing to the butler, he grasped both shoulders and exclaimed, "Jeeves! Why didn't you warn me sooner? She's terrifying." He had only met Lady Koharu once, and her intense, unreadable expression had made quite the impression. He gave a visible shudder. Jeeves remained composed as ever. "I assumed you were already aware, sir." With that, the man hurried off, arms flailing as he sprinted down the hall. "Sir!" Jeeves called after him. "May I remind you that, as the daimyo, you must be accompanied by a personal guard at all times?" The words brought the daimyo to an abrupt halt. "If I don't have a guard, Akainu will be furious. But if I wait for one..." A vision of Koharu's steely gaze crossed his mind. With a dramatic sigh, he resumed his sprint. "Akainu will probably scold me later. But this is a risk I must take." Comical tears trailed behind him as he ran, a royal in full retreat. Dash. Meanwhile, Naruko let out a quiet breath as she strolled through the grand halls of the estate. While it was technically a palace, no one really called it that. It had the elegance and scale of one, certainly, but it was designed more like a luxurious family residence. As her friend Keshi had put it, "You're in the living quarters of possibly the most important person in the country. Try to act like it." Naruko's first impression had been less formal. "Wow, this place is incredible," she had said aloud, eyes wide with awe. As she neared the end of the hallway, she heard the sound of hurried footsteps growing louder above. Looking up toward the balcony, she saw a man clumsily rushing toward a stairwell. She recalled hearing that the estate housed not just the daimyo and his family, but also chefs, maids, and a personal security team, essentially a small community. Assuming the man was one of the staff, she called out, "Hey there, could you help me out for a second?" The man stopped mid-step and looked down at her, noticeably out of breath. Her attire caught his attention. He didn't recognize her, and more importantly, she didn't look like one of the guards. "You know, civilians aren't usually allowed here," he said. His tone was oddly enthusiastic, if a little clumsy in delivery. Naruko simply stared, choosing not to react to the odd comment. "I've met some characters before, but this one might take the cake." She kept her tone even. "Right. Well, I was actually just looking for rooms 988, 989, and 990. Do you know where those are?" The man narrowed his eyes and looked at her again, clearly trying to piece things together. You're either someone highly trained or a lost visitor. And considering your gear, you're clearly not the latter." His deduction seemed to bring him great personal satisfaction. Naruko sighed, shoulders slightly slumping. "This is going to take a while." Trying to diffuse the confusion, she raised her hands gently. "Look, I'm here with a team. We're setting up in a few rooms ahead of time. That's all." She scratched the back of her head, a little embarrassed. Being sent ahead to prepare the rooms wasn't the most glamorous job for a Jinan, but someone had to do it. In truth, she suspected Lady Koharu didn't want her present when the formal introductions happened. The man's eyes trailed down to the metal headband wrapped around her arm. His gaze sharpened, and suddenly he brightened. "You're a new recruit, aren't you?" he exclaimed with joy. Naruko blinked in disbelief. So close. And yet so far. Why is this happening to me? The man didn't wait for her response. "Perfect. Your timing is amazing. Consider yourself officially hired." "All right, hold on, you really need to slow down," she replied, growing increasingly frustrated. Completely ignoring her protests, he continued, beaming, "Your first assignment. Please just listen to me for a second. Escort mission." "I'm not a guard," she snapped, exasperated. "From floor 3, corridor 6, to the palace entry. You'll be escorting a very important guest." Naruko groaned internally. Seriously? But something about the situation told her she'd have to play along, at least for now. "I, the daimyo of the Fire Country, will be your client," the man declared proudly. A brief pause hung in the air before a soft but firm sound echoed through the hall. Naruko looked around, her blue eyes settling back on the daimyo, who now appeared a bit stunned. Her hand lowered from its raised position. "You know what? I don't even regret that." "An apology would have been appreciated," the daimyo remarked, dabbing at the light mark on his cheek. Despite his position as arguably the most powerful man in the country, he looked at Naruko with an expression that could only be described as a mixture of surprise and confusion. Naruko didn't glance back. "And why would you expect one?" she replied calmly. Compared to what had just occurred, this conversation felt inconsequential, which is likely why she remained unfazed. "You did strike me rather firmly," the daimyo said, sounding more surprised than offended. "I honestly thought you were one of my new guards." Naruko gave a dry chuckle and leaned casually against the wall. "If by thought you mean you jumped to conclusions without checking any facts, despite having all the tools to find out, then yes, you were close. I'm a ninja." His face lit up with genuine excitement. "A ninja? Aren't you a bit young? The most seasoned ninja I've seen wasn't even that old. You don't look much older than a school student." Though he was curious, Naruko didn't respond to the compliment. "You need a certain skill level to be assigned higher ranked missions. Despite my age, I've been deemed capable. That's why I'm here, though, admittedly, not making the best impression." The daimyo studied her, clearly intrigued. "You're an unusual ninja. Most of the ones I meet barely speak. I have to pull words out of them one at a time. You're different." "Naruko," the blonde corrected him with a slight nod. "And yes, I've always been a bit different. Trouble tends to find me, as you've probably noticed." She was already considering various ways to explain the situation. She knew that dealing with Koharu wouldn't be easy, there was little hope of excusing this entirely, but perhaps Sarutobi might give her the benefit of the doubt, with some creative truth and a rookie mistake thrown in. It was a long shot, but maybe worth it. The daimyo's smile widened ever so slightly when she said her name. He recalled it, distinctly, in fact. It was one he hadn't heard in a long time, not since Hiruzen had mentioned it. He had hoped to meet the girl someday, though his position had made that difficult. Now here she was, in his office. Right on cue, the large door to the office opened. Naruko stood straight and saluted, while the daimyo remained seated, adopting a more formal demeanor, one that surprised Naruko given how casual he had been moments before. Koharu entered, followed by a stout man dressed in a crisp black and white suit. He politely held the door, received thanks from both high-ranking figures, then exited quietly. Koharu's gaze immediately registered three things she hadn't expected: Naruko's presence, the noticeable mark on the daimyo's face, and the tense atmosphere that hung in the room. Her mind leapt to a possible explanation, and it made her pause. Still, traditions prevailed. The daimyo stood only after she reached the center of the room and gave a respectful bow. "Welcome, Elder Koharu Yutane. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Of course," she replied graciously. "I hope my brief stay does not inconvenience any of your affairs." As tradition dictated, formalities had to be observed, especially with village elders like Koharu. While he might have taken a more relaxed approach with Hiruzen, this was different. She was here on official business, to discuss village policies, proposed changes, and financial matters. Their week would be packed with important decisions. "If I may ask, how did you receive that injury? It appears rather recent." Her eyes drifted momentarily to Naruko, who remained still and disciplined. Naruko had yet to be addressed, so she stood silently, her eyes briefly meeting the daimyo's. She could have sworn she saw a flicker of amusement there. "Ah, yes. That," the daimyo said quickly, waving it off with a light-hearted tone. "Well, I had a bit of a stumble on the stairs. Fortunately, this young ninja," he gestured toward Naruko, "was nearby to assist and make sure I got here safely." Naruko's eyes narrowed slightly before returning to neutral. Koharu didn't miss it. She examined Naruko carefully. The young ninja held the posture of someone trained in formal etiquette, calm, composed, and alert. To the untrained eye, it may have looked like disinterest, but Koharu recognized a calculated presence. "Excellent work, Naruko-san. You may be dismissed." Naruko ignored the honorific and exited swiftly in a blur of motion, utilizing the body flicker technique. Though uncertain of the full situation, one thing was clear: if the daimyo had let the matter go this easily, there were likely larger reasons behind it. She shrugged it off as she returned to her quarters. Time would reveal the truth. Back in the office, the daimyo broke the silence. "I'll never understand how your ninja can vanish like that. I mean, from a civilian perspective, it seems impossible. Shouldn't physics prevent it? Doesn't it disrupt how everything fits together?" Curious, but not foolish, Koharu noted. As a veteran of more than 60 years, she had encountered every type of person imaginable. Despite his light demeanor, the injury on his cheek was clearly not from a fall. She didn't press it. If he didn't want to talk, it wasn't her place. If her assumption was correct, he clearly wasn't concerned. If not, then the matter would fade on its own. She responded calmly, "It's done with chakra. We learn to focus it in specific ways to move rapidly between locations. The farther the distance, the more energy and training it requires. It's quite effective, but also not easy to master." The daimyo took mental note of the term, chakra, not katra. He laughed heartily. "So the young lady is actually quite skilled. I thought Hiruzen just sent her along to keep things entertaining." Koharu corrected gently, "She's indeed talented for her age. One of our top jonin, Kakashi Hatake, is responsible for her team. He's fully in charge of their development, training, and assignments until they reach the next rank." The daimyo nodded thoughtfully. Even he recognized that name. If someone like Kakashi was entrusted with complete authority over a team, including Naruko, then she must be more than just promising. He ran a hand through his hair and gave a grin. "I suppose that's expected, considering her background and the important role she carries." The moment the words left his lips, he regretted them. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, not with hostility, but with unmistakable tension. He had clearly touched on a sensitive subject. She chose her words with care. "We don't speak of such matters. Considering that the girl is unaware of her burden and her heritage, I kindly ask that you refrain from repeating those words." There was no surprise in her tone regarding his knowledge. Hiruzen had no choice but to explain certain truths shortly after the Nine Tails incident in the village. The fourth Hokage had made a great sacrifice, and the Nine Tails had been sealed into his daughter. That was the version she recalled. It wasn't difficult to guess who Naruko's father was. One look at her, and the resemblance to Minato Namikaze was unmistakable. Besides, it was common knowledge that the daimyo had shared a close relationship with Minato. The daimyo gave a small, knowing smile. I thought as much. He rose from his chair and stretched, signaling the conclusion of their meeting. There's no use dwelling on the past. I'd like to spend some time getting to know the girl over the next few days, see what she's capable of, if that's all right with you? Though his words seemed polite, the tone made it clear it wasn't a request. You may, she replied. She didn't really have a choice, but deep down, she believed that Naruko had been sent here to grow, both in understanding and maturity. After a confrontation with Danzo, Hiruzen had hoped to help her come to terms with her unique circumstances and gain clarity about her path. There was no stopping a 12-year-old wish from a daimyo who had once been best friends with Minato, especially if this was something Hiruzen had truly supported. 3 days later. Give me your best shot. Naruko stood calmly, one hand scratching the back of her neck, the other at the ready as she faced Izumo. Her expression said it all, she knew exactly what was being thought. She let out a light sigh. I know I could at least surprise you. I'm much stronger than you've been giving me credit for. Izumo let out a small laugh. I doubt that. You're still fresh from the academy. Besides, we finally got a break, first one in days. Don't you want to make the most of it? Maybe go into town for a bit? He and Kotetsu had been busy securing the daimyo's residence, ensuring everything was well guarded. A breather sounded nice. I haven't trained in 3 days. I need to move around, Naruko chuckled, seeing Izumo's reaction. Tell you what, if you win, we'll head downtown. Fair? The large, open field behind the palace was perfect for sparring. Surrounded by woods and royal gardens, it reminded her a little of home in Konoha. All right, let's get this over with, Izumo said, disappearing in a flash. Always stay alert, Naruko. He called as he reappeared behind her. He aimed a swift punch, which Naruko caught effortlessly. Maybe you're better than I expected, twinkle toes. Izumo pushed back, realizing he had underestimated her. Her reflexes are sharp. That's not something you can easily train, you either have it or you don't. He narrowly dodged one of Naruko's punches and forced her to retreat with a well-timed kick, which she avoided with a smooth sidestep. You're not bad. Encouraged, Naruko upped her pace. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 6 clones formed quickly at her sides, while Naruko herself remained still, studying her opponent carefully as the clones rushed in. Izumo raised an eyebrow. Only 12? I heard you had extraordinary chakra reserves. He leapt high, kicking through the first clone before weaving through the others toward the original. Naruko's clones surrounded him, prompting him to pull out a kunai and brace himself. As the clones attacked, Izumo ducked swiftly and countered with a controlled strike, skillfully navigating through them with precise movements. He managed to fend off another, then blocked a strike with his open palm. Seizing the opportunity, he immobilized the clone before dispersing it with a single well-aimed move. 4 down, Naruko. He called out playfully. But his voice lost some of its cheer when he caught a glimpse of the real Naruko. She wasn't upset, but focused, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Without giving her opponent a moment to react, more of Naruko's clones rushed in, this time with kunai drawn and ready. She took the brunt of a punch to avoid the swift flurry of kunai that followed, countering with a series of low leg sweeps and precise strikes, neutralizing several clones in the process. The sound of metal clashing echoed across the training field as she maneuvered smoothly. Grabbing one of her own clones, she used it defensively before launching another swift strike at a nearby target. That's when the familiar hissing sound, a clear sign to any trained shinobi, caught her attention. Turning her head quickly, Naruko caught sight of her grinning across the battlefield, an explosive note attached to the front of her shirt, nearly activated. As if the sight weren't already alarming, Naruko silently mouthed the words only 12 with a mischievous glint in her eye. In the next instant, a controlled blast went off, sending Izumo and the final clone flying. Though a little roughed up, Izumo emerged from the smoke mostly unscathed. She's got talent, he admitted, adjusting his stance. It hadn't been too close, but it definitely wasn't the smooth bout he'd expected. As he looked up again, Naruko was still in place, her expression calm but slightly unimpressed. I thought there'd be more to it than that, she said flatly. In response, Naruko brought her hands together in the familiar cross sign, and with a focused breath, around 100 new clones sprang to life in front of her. Izumo's face paled slightly. Why do I keep underestimating her? Just like before, Naruko stayed behind, arms folded, observing carefully while the clones did the fighting. From the way they moved, it was clear she had given them silent commands, to hold Izumo back and prevent him from reaching the original. He had to rely on a few well-practiced techniques just to stay ahead, occasionally using the substitution jutsu to avoid tight spots. After a series of swift hand signs, Izumo performed a water-style technique. Water style, liquid bullet. He called out. The clones were swept away, and for a brief moment, the field was quiet again. Across the way, Naruko stood undisturbed, though her clothes bore a few light tears and a small scrape marked her cheek where a kunai had grazed past. Izumo's breath caught slightly. She fights with more precision than I expected from someone so young. Clearly, Kakashi had taught Naruko well. She wasn't fighting like a novice at all, her movements were calculated, her choices purposeful. Despite knowing she was outmatched in experience and raw strength, she wasn't giving up or acting recklessly. Instead, she leaned on her advantages and made smart decisions. The Shadow Clone Jutsu was her specialty, capable of transferring experience back to the original once dispelled. Naruko had clearly studied the jutsu thoroughly. Most shinobi avoided it due to how much chakra it used, but that wasn't a concern for her. But even more impressive was how she used it. Not just as a tool for distraction, but as a way to test tactics and gather information. Each clone gave her insight into how Izumo moved, defended, and attacked. Bit by bit, she used it to figure out the best way to challenge him without putting herself at direct risk. Izumo narrowed his eyes, finally beginning to understand her plan. Naruko smirked knowingly. "You're pretty sharp to figure it out now," she said, seeing right through his delayed realization. "And don't think I didn't notice you trying to sneak your own clones behind me." She casually pulled out 2 kunai and launched them behind her. 2 quick pops confirmed she had hit her targets. "It's a pretty effective strategy, don't you think?" she added. Izumo exhaled, a little annoyed but mostly impressed. "By the time I caught on, you'd already broken me down and gathered more than enough intel," he admitted. Naruko laughed, summoning a few more clones for good measure. "I had 3 days of downtime to think this through. I figured Izumo and Kotetsu don't get much field work these days, you mostly do gate duty, right? Put the pieces together and ta-da. Even if you're stronger, I had the upper hand." She grinned, clearly proud of herself. "Can't wait to tell Keshi about this one." Izumo collapsed onto the grass, exhausted but smiling through it. "You're a handful, you know that?" Finishing up by giving some instructions to her clones, Naruko strolled over and gave her teammate a gentle nudge with her foot. "So, are we heading downtown now? I've actually been looking forward to checking it out." Izumo groaned, cracking one eye open. "I need a nap first, kid. That match took it out of me." Naruko let out a long sigh. "Seriously? Even Sasuke would have lasted longer." She got a half-hearted wave in response before shrugging and muttering, "You're about as useful as a paper umbrella in a storm, Izumo. I mean that kindly." As she walked away, Izumo chuckled quietly to himself. "That one line is what I'll share with the folks back in Konoha. It sums Naruko up pretty well." Naruko let out a long yawn as she strolled through the busy streets of the capital. For the most part, it was uneventful. The city reminded her a lot of Konoha, only on a much grander scale. Instead of ninja patrolling, there were uniformed guards stationed at regular intervals, and the layout itself was surprisingly similar. The main difference was in the architecture. The buildings here tended to be taller and more often built with stone. She wasn't entirely sure why she had wandered away from the comfort of the palace and its expansive grounds. Honestly, she would have much rather spent the time training than wandering around aimlessly. "Maybe if I had some money this would be more entertaining," she thought to herself with a sigh. In retrospect, coming to the market district without a single coin probably wasn't the wisest decision. Her clones had been making great progress with Fuinjutsu and other theory-based disciplines. Some were even going through kata drills, since the muscle memory would transfer back to her. But what she really needed was some personal training time. As the thought crossed her mind, she briefly considered heading back, but decided against it. She had already been walking for more than 10 minutes, surely, something interesting was bound to happen soon, right? Naruko had a reputation for attracting unexpected encounters, often the exciting kind, and her patience was starting to wear thin. Where was the towering beast or rogue ninja that she was supposed to confront? This calm, peaceful atmosphere wasn't what she expected. Why does this place feel so normal? Not a single person had glanced her way with suspicion or disapproval, which felt surprisingly odd. In Konoha, looks of disapproval had become something she simply got used to. She had spent time thinking about it in the past, forming theories of her own, but she had since pushed it out of her mind. Now it was just background noise, barely worth noticing. Another yawn slipped out, and as she scratched the back of her neck absent-mindedly, she noticed a giggle from her left. She blinked and looked around, confused. "Huh?" There it was again, a quiet giggle. Her trained eyes quickly picked out the source. "Oh no. Not this again," she muttered under her breath, recognizing the signs from her early days at the academy. She wasn't entirely new to this sort of situation, but that didn't mean she was particularly fond of it. A small group of girls was heading her way, and while Naruko didn't exactly want to get caught up in anything awkward, she remembered Ino's advice quite clearly: girls are kind, thoughtful, and each one is special. Treat them with respect. Never assume it's okay to speak to them carelessly. Ino's words had stuck with her, and they surfaced now more than ever. She turned her attention to the three girls approaching her. They looked slightly older than her, maybe a year or two, and wore casual summer outfits typical for the fire country, short denim shorts to stay cool, paired with comfortable short-sleeve tops. Naruko's gaze hesitated for a moment on the girl in the center. She was hard to ignore, with an energetic presence and a confident smile. "Whoa, she's only a little older than me." Naruko quickly pulled her eyes up to meet the girl's gaze. "No distractions. Stay respectful. Eyes up." The girl in the center giggled again as her friends nudged her forward, clearly encouraging her to speak. "Hi there. My name's Akiko. You looked kind of lost," she said cheerfully, her friends stifling more laughter at the playful tone. Naruko caught the hint but kept her tone polite. "Nice to meet you, Akiko. I'm Naruko. I guess I do look a little out of place. I've never been to the capital before, so I thought I'd take a quick look around." Though Naruko hadn't spent much time outside her village, she was quick on her feet, mentally and socially. She could usually find her way out of awkward moments with a quick excuse or clever response, even if they weren't always the most convincing. Another trait of hers was self-control. She could keep a straight face in nearly any situation. But even she wasn't perfect. Everyone had their strengths and weaknesses. Physically, Naruko was naturally agile and fast, though not the strongest in raw power. Socially, well, she was still working on that. And as soon as she finished speaking, she realized she may have said a little too much. Naruko made 3 missteps. The natural curiosity of a growing girl made it obvious she was intrigued, even if she didn't want to be. The other 2 weren't entirely her fault. Following Ino's advice a little too thoroughly, she focused on being polite. Her subtle, almost shy smile, paired with her shinobi attire and signature hair, unintentionally matched the rare and often unspoken appeal some teenage girls admired. The only issue? She had no desire to attract that kind of attention. "I'd rather take on an S-ranked mission than deal with this," she thought. Akiko let out a cheerful squeal. "What? This is your first time in the capital? I have to show you around." It wasn't really a suggestion. Before Naruko could react, the bubbly stranger had taken her hand and was guiding her through the bustling market. "How did we even end up here? And what's the point of all this?" Naruko asked, more to herself than anyone else. She was starting to understand why people always talked about the capital. It really did have everything. At first, the unplanned, albeit informative, tour felt standard. Food vendors, clothing shops, and other typical stalls lined the path. But the deeper they ventured into the market, the more unusual the offerings became. Akiko was quick to explain, "The further in you go, the more luxurious it gets. See that over there?" She pointed to an umbrella stand. "Those are full-body umbrellas. And those? Rotating ice cream cones." She giggled at Naruko's unimpressed expression. "Hey, don't judge. Things are just different here. Regular folks wouldn't buy most of this, but the high society crowd? They love this stuff." Sure enough, when Naruko glanced at the price tags, her eyes widened in disbelief. Akiko giggled again at her reaction. Naruko playfully responded, "If I had to guess, I'd say you're having a good time." She had to admit, spending time with Akiko had been more enjoyable than expected. "I didn't think you'd ditch your friends like that, though." Akiko blushed at the mention. Earlier, she'd whispered, "Let's sneak out," when they were about to enter another boutique. Since her 2 friends were distracted up front, the pair slipped away unnoticed. "You know that wasn't exactly polite," Naruko teased, ending the comment with a laugh. Akiko's playful personality soon made a return. "You looked like you were about to break when they headed toward another store. And don't think I didn't notice the glance you gave me earlier." She crossed her arms and gave a teasing wink, clearly hoping to get a reaction. But Naruko simply stared back, unfazed, which made Akiko pout. Naruko nudged her with a light elbow as they strolled past the crowd. "Come on now, don't act like the innocent one, you're the one who started checking me out first." Akiko gave a pretend glare. "You're such a buzzkill, Naruko." Naruko didn't even blink. "No. I'm just the unlucky person who got dragged through a market by someone I barely know. And for the record, that's the first time anyone's ever called me a buzzkill. I am not a buzzkill. Akiko laughed again at her rant. You're hilarious, you know that? So I've been told. A little on the graceful side too. Your hair's kinda girly, but hey, nobody's perfect. She shrugged, glancing sideways to see if her words would get a rise out of Naruko. And they did, just a little. Naruko looked at her dryly. Not you too. It's natural, not dyed. Natural. That last word came out in a slightly exaggerated tone, making Akiko burst into laughter again. They continued exploring the market. Somewhere along the way, Naruko realized she had completely forgotten about going back to the palace. She barely knew Akiko, but walking around like this, without any pressure or glares from others, was unexpectedly refreshing. Her stomach let out a quiet growl, and she sighed. I haven't eaten in forever. Akiko picked up on the hint. Hungry? I know a fantastic ramen stand just around the corner. Let's go, I'm buying, as a thank you for being such a good sport. As usual, before Naruko could politely decline, Akiko had already taken her hand again and was leading the way. Not that she minded. She was getting free ramen after all. Her gaze wandered downward as she followed Akiko, and with a small smile, she thought, the view's not bad either. By the time Naruko made it back to the palace, it was already late, but her shift didn't begin until midnight, so everything was still on track. That said, she wasn't exactly excited about the lecture she was sure to get from Keshi once he found out about her brief stroll around the capital. She hadn't done anything wrong, but Keshi was a firm believer in everyone getting proper rest before duty. Lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, she had one hand behind her head and the other spinning a kunai between her fingers. Occasionally, she tossed it at the ceiling, where she had installed a reflector tag, an amusing little distraction. Like a tennis ball, the harder she threw it, the stronger it bounced back. One of the many perks of learning Fuinjutsu, she mused. Her progress in the sealing arts had been slow. With Kakashi's intense training schedule, she hadn't found much time to study, and creating too many shadow clones just gave her a splitting headache. She made a mental note to prioritize Fuinjutsu tomorrow. Instead of sending clones to practice combat forms, she'd assign them to her sealing studies. As usual, boredom led her thoughts to wander. Izumo and Kotetsu were already on duty, and only Koharu seemed to know where Keshi had gone off to. Her mind drifted back to how she'd spent her day. Akiko had definitely been an interesting person to meet. Naruko hadn't shared why she was in the capital or where she was staying, though the Hittite probably gave away her status as a shinobi. Still, their time together had just been lighthearted fun, and that was perfectly fine with her. The door creaked open, pulling her out of her thoughts. So, you're back. Thanks for the update, kid. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Didn't realize you'd turned into the overprotective type already, Keshi. The man leaned against the doorframe, giving her a half-hearted glare. The daimyo wants to see you. Naruko's gaze snapped toward him. He continued before she could ask. You've been reassigned. You're to report to his office in 10 minutes. No longer on the North Watchtower. Keshi was always like this, calm, direct, and a little mysterious. Still, she wanted more context. Any particular reason for the change? Not that I'm complaining, but isn't that assignment for someone more senior? He chuckled. Second guessing yourself already? That's not like you. A few days in the capital and you're already going soft? He gave a genuine laugh before adding, I don't know the reason. You'll have to ask him yourself. Actually, don't. You'd probably do it just to prove a point. To be honest, Naruko's bold nature often let her get away with things others couldn't. Most people had come to accept that trying to rein her in was a lost cause. She let out a soft sigh and sat up, stretching. Let's answer in order. I never doubt myself, no I haven't gone soft, and yes, I do intend to ask. She hadn't told the others about her earlier meeting with the daimyo. It was a proud moment for her, and she intended to hold on to that memory a little longer. Keshi gave her a small nod. You've done well. Just be careful not to cross any lines. Naruko raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? Wow, I didn't know you gave those out. She gave a deep, theatrical bow. Thank you, Keshi-sama. The sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable. Predicting a playful jab in return, she swiftly vanished with a body flicker, reappearing in the hallway. She fist-pumped the air with a grin. There was something satisfying about pushing Keshi's buttons. He was stoic and serious, and every word he spoke carried weight, which made it even more amusing to lightly poke at that exterior. Guess I really am a troublemaker, she thought with a grin. Exactly 10 minutes later, Naruko stood inside the daimyo's office. She had been greeted formally upon arrival, and since then, the room had remained quiet. Not tense, not awkward, just a calm silence while she respectfully stood guard. After a short while, her curiosity got the better of her. "Why are you working so late? I mean, you're the daimyo. Can't someone else handle this sort of paperwork?" The man looked up and chuckled. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to speak. No other shinobi posted here has ever broken the silence first. You're certainly different, Naruko-san." She waved a hand dismissively. "No need for honorifics. I'm guessing they don't speak because of your position, the reputation you carry." He nodded slowly, considering her words. "And yet, you're not intimidated." Naruko tilted her head thoughtfully. I wouldn't say that. I do respect your authority, and I understand the kind of influence you hold. But I also believe that power like yours is only dangerous if misused. And considering how long you've ruled and the way things are run, I trust you're someone who uses it wisely." The daimyo smiled. "Well said. It does get quite dull in here. The truth is, many of these documents can only be reviewed by me personally. Much like your Hokage, I have responsibilities and deadlines to meet. Still, after all these years, not one of my guards or staff has ever started a conversation. You're the first." Despite the formal setting, Naruko casually pulled out her kunai and tossed it across the room. Just before it hit the far wall, it bounced sharply back into her hand. She did it again a few more times. The daimyo watched with clear curiosity. "How are you doing that? How does it return so precisely?" Naruko smirked. "Looks like we're starting a little trend. For every question you ask, I get to ask one too." The daimyo laughed, nodding in agreement. He found her intriguing, and something told him he'd enjoy this conversation more than most. She gave a playful smile. "Well then, I'm counting that last one as two." Ignoring the daimyo's skeptical expression, she continued with ease. "To answer your first question, it's a chakra manipulation technique. I do it like this." Naruko held the kunai out with one hand, and with a swift motion of the other, she demonstrated. "You couldn't see it, but I just extended a fine string of chakra and connected it to the kunai. That way, I can bring it back without physically reaching for it." To finish her point, she flicked her wrist and the kunai returned neatly to her hand. "It's actually a method used by puppeteers to control objects from a distance. I thought I'd learn it myself. Mostly so I can grab stuff without getting off the couch," she admitted, sounding a little sheepish. The daimyo didn't fully grasp the mechanics behind it, but he was clearly impressed, until her last comment drew a chuckle from him. "I can tell you're a bit on the relaxed side." Naruko simply shrugged. "I prefer the term efficient. Anyway, it's my turn. What's your name?" That'll do. "And what's your dream?" Her questions came quickly, not particularly structured, more a stream of curiosity than anything else. To say he was surprised would be putting it lightly. Of all the questions she could have asked, that was what she led with. Koharu was definitely right, this girl is unpredictable, he thought. Setting his quill down and removing his glasses, the daimyo leaned back in his chair, adopting a more casual posture. "My name is Ikihito. And my dream? Well, I suppose it was to have a family. And I believe I've achieved that. Why do you ask?" Naruko blinked, slightly surprised herself. "Ikihito? Wow, that's still a mouthful. What was your dad thinking, giving you a name with 4 syllables? The reason I asked is because calling you Lord Daimyo-sama all the time is kind of a hassle. Mind if I call you by your name? I really don't like using honorifics." The request left the daimyo momentarily stunned. Naruko was clearly gifted, a young kunoichi with more experience than most her age, but at moments like this, it was easy to remember she was still a child. No one had ever asked something like that of him before. As a boy, he had always been referred to formally, even by those close to him. Even Minato had used the proper titles. Shaking off his surprise, he responded, "No, I don't mind at all, Naruko. You're quite the mystery." He went on to explain the current situation, which only earned a small shrug and a head shake from the young ninja. "People keep saying that. Honestly, I'm not too sure myself. I just like exploring things that interest me." Ikihito raised an eyebrow with a knowing smile. "So, is that why you seemed pretty happy walking around with that girl earlier? She must have been interesting." Naruko's eyes widened. "How did you know about that?" He chuckled at her reaction. "Relax, some of my guards mentioned it. They saw you two in the market district and thought I should know." Naruko narrowed her gaze, choosing her words carefully. "So, you've got people keeping an eye on me?" "I do," He answered honestly. I believe in transparency. Koharu suggested you might not like it, though. Naruko snorted, amused more than annoyed. I'm not going to throw a fit just because someone's keeping tabs on me, she said, grinning at Ikihito's surprised expression. Especially not after how we first met. Still, I'm a bit curious. Why are you so interested in me, anyway? Why wouldn't I be? He replied, smiling warmly. Hiruzen has told me quite a bit about you. From everything I've seen and heard, you're quite the exceptional ninja. I expect we'll be hearing a lot more from you in the future. Naruko grew quiet, her gaze thoughtful. That particular statement didn't sit right with her. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. There was something more behind it. She didn't know how she knew, but instinct told her he wasn't being completely upfront. The compliment was genuine, sure, but it wasn't the whole story. A gentle silence filled the room for a moment before Naruko, voice calm but eyes narrowed with subtle suspicion, spoke again. You said you were an honest man. But that was a half-truth. Why are you really interested in me? Internally, Ikihito smiled. He wasn't going to give everything away, but maybe, just maybe, she'd uncover it on her own. You're a remarkable young girl, Naruko. There's more to you than meets the eye. You possess unique abilities. Some of which have been kept from you for reasons beyond your control. He had planned to stop there. But when his eyes met hers, something changed. They weren't blank or indifferent anymore, they were searching, full of emotion. He hesitated for only a second before continuing, despite knowing better. That's all I can say for now. But trust me, there is something special within you. You're far from ordinary, Naruko. I believe you have the potential to achieve great things. That moment, though meant to encourage her, became a turning point. The daimyo, a man known for wisdom and long years of leadership, had made a rare miscalculation. With good intentions, he had opened the door to a truth Naruko had long suspected. She wasn't the type to ignore signs or brush off oddities. She paid attention. She asked tough questions. Not why do people care about me? But, why do people avoid me? Why do they whisper? Why do they call me names when they think I'm not listening? She had always felt something was different. She'd had dreams. Strange ones. And now, the final pieces were starting to fall into place. So I'm a Jinchuriki, she murmured. It was something she'd feared. Something she had considered in passing, in her quietest moments. A thought that lingered in shadows, always just outside her comfort zone. And now, it felt real. And that's it for this part of the fanfic, guys. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more epic content coming your way. Thanks so much for the love and support, you all mean the world to me. Stay legendary. 6 Path Weeb.